generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. The countdown's so short now. Maybe it doesn't feel like that, Amy, but we started out at like 2 minutes. What was it?
I don't remember, but I definitely am not getting enough of the music.
Well, I'm
It
just
went by super
realizing
fast.
I forgot to close like all the other things on my desktop that are like distracting, like the development environment and everything, and I had to scramble and do that, but there wasn't enough time. So I got to show off here, guys. I got, it's Zero Trust Day. I've got I zero trust washed our brand for everyone here because that's what the cool kids are doing in 2023 is we splash zero trust paint on. So anyway, had to get in on the party.
Every product, it's all zero trust.
Well, how'd you go with yellow?
It looked good
Looks
with the green
nice with
stripe.
the black shirt.
Yeah, the black. Everything looks good with black.
It's true.
Anyway, so it's Friday afternoon. I got blue skies here. You guys, are you feeling? I just heard there's a tropical storm on the west coast, down in the south, which I guess hasn't happened in living memory. I don't know how the rest of the country's doing right now. You're at the marina.
We're against the lakes in the middle, so we're good. Or we're good on the Toledo Lake.
Total blue sky here and massive winds, but we'll take it. I love blue sky weekend coming up.
So today's Zero Trust Day, but let me throw up our names here real quick. I am Matt Fish, founder of Fort Mesa. We're here to talk a little bit about context-based access control today and all that Zero Trust hype. We'll talk more about the Fort Mesa value prop at the end, but with that, Amy and Zach, you want to do little intros?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. My name is Zach Keeney. I am a co-founder and channel sales director with Fort Mesa. Prior to my time on the team, I owned my own small franchise and contracted and worked directly with MSPs to help run my business. So I bring to the table a little bit of a perspective from that side, and happy to be here.
All right, my name's Amy Babinchak. I am a owner of ThirdTier, which helps out other MSPs in various ways, training and stuff. And I also own an MSP, and I'm a Microsoft MVP. This is my 17th year as a Microsoft MVP. So somewhere along the way, I'd admit that I bleed a little bit blue.
I'm a little jealous. Early in my career, I had all that MVP fan emotions. Every time I brushed up against shoulders with someone up in the channel there. So you've been carrying that flag a long time. What's it like to be in that program? And there's a lot of responsibilities, right? To represent the brand and best practices, right?
Well, Microsoft looks for people that are sharing with the community, right? So it's basically recognition that you've been out there in the community for the last year doing good stuff, and that it's a peer nominated thing. So people out there in the community have to be saying good stuff about you, which, so I appreciate everybody. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's stuff I'm doing anyway, stuff I enjoy. It's educating people and writing blogs and going out and speaking. And Microsoft doesn't pay us. They probably should, but they don't. And but it's just I love this industry, so it's stuff that I'm just out there doing anyhow. It's
How,
nice to be awarded and have someone recognize it.
how'd you get your start in the industry?
Oh, you know, um, probably like a lot of people did. Um, yeah, I'm in my 50s, so at that point in time, um, I started off as a computer science major, and then it was just super boring because it was all mainframe stuff, and it was no fun at all. Like, but I knew what I wanted to do, so I started changed majors, went into economics and government policy and stuff like that. And but everywhere I went and all the jobs I had ended up being the computer person anyway. Plus, I was building computers for my friends, and I usually say, Michael Dell and I were building computers in our dorm room, and he thought it was a business, and I didn't. And so I was just doing it for my friends. Um, so yeah, that's and then eventually I decided that, what, once the world sort of caught up with the whole PC and businesses, client server network thing, that's it again kind of dragged me in, and I switched careers, never looked back.
All right. Well, before we jump into the topic of the day, we are going to cover the control of the day. So with that, let's jump into the CIS control we're going to look at today. So we're here looking at it's really like on 2 pages today. CIS version 8 data protection section. Um, and CIS is split up into 18 controls, and then they have a number of what they call sub controls. Data protection has 14 parts. Not all the CIS controls have so many pieces, but there's a lot that needs to be done to protect data. Um, so I just want to go over the basics of what healthy data protection management should look like. Whether you are a small business or you only work with small businesses, or maybe you work with someone in the mid market, a business with a few hundred or even several hundred employees, or if you're a large enterprise. You're all going to relate to data protection in different ways, depending on the industry you're in, sometimes the region you're in, sometimes the style of business, whether you're B2B or B2C, or the segment of the economy that you're in, whether you're in something like critical infrastructure or you're in healthcare, financial services, or none of those things. Even in manufacturing, um, you know, sometimes the availability of that data can be the difference between having a profitable year and not having a profitable year. So, just to run through real quick, we'll start at the top. So, just like most of these controls, you're not really creating security architecture. You don't really have a security plan or an overall control architecture if you are not planning around it. So, the first thing you need to do is put together a management process. This can be very simple. It could be a few sentences on a page. It could be a few sentences as part of a page that talks about things other than data protection. It depends on what your organization needs. But you should sit down as an organization and decide how important is that data to you? What are the requirements? Things like, is this highly sensitive? Are there legal requirements? What would happen if the data was changed without authorization? What would happen if people got access to it without authorization? What would happen if the data was unavailable? These are all things that you should discuss as a management team, or you should discuss with your client before you can say that their data is secure. Before you can say your data is secure, you need to have those contextual conversations so that you know how deep those data protections need to go. So that's high level, and every single organization, whether you are a car wash with a few point of sale machines, right, or you're a large enterprise with 100,000 employees, you do need to go through that scoping process for data management. But it can be simple or it can be quite comprehensive. After that, you need to inventory the data. We've talked about inventory a lot. This is just making a list. The list can be simple. It can be on a spreadsheet. It can be in a Word doc. You can use an actual inventory system. Fort Mesa has a data inventory module that we use to help people map this type of thing. And when we talk about data inventory, we're talking about, hey, we've got data in a database. That's obvious, right? But we also might have data in a file server. We might also have data out with a third party, like out in Google Drive and some SaaS platform, or it may even be data that exists at a third party and you don't even have direct access to it. But because you maybe outsource a piece of your business to that third party, they have some data that pertains to you or your customers or your business. And that also needs to be inventoried. So just really write down someplace this list of data. And if you want to go to the next level, you might classify the data, you might mark the sensitivity. We'll get to that in a minute, but you have to have a list to start. And then we look at access controls. And I think that pretty much everyone that's watching this understands that people are going to have different levels of access to data, and different people are going to have different levels of different types of access to data. Best practice in industry right now is typically role-based access controls, although there are other ways you can perform access control management. This is yeah, I'm seeing some notes here. We have you're right. This is CIS version 8 control 3. So it was transposed there on the slide. But we have yes. So it's Center for Internet Security Controls version 8 control 3 is the answer. Someone was asking which control framework is it? So that's access controls. Enforced data retention. So if you pick up a theory book, they're going to define data retention as being an amount of time that you're supposed to hold on to data. And the way that organizations should be looking at this is that as an organization, and for each type of data, but maybe start out holistically, we want to keep data as an organization for at least this amount of time. But the other side of the equation is after another amount of time, or maybe the same amount of time, we no longer want to hold that information. So that's important to look at both sides of that. We want to maintain information at least this long because there may be contractual requirements or business value requirements or legal regulatory requirements to keep data at least a certain amount of time. So in healthcare, it's required to keep patient data as long as it is relevant. It becomes a big cost. In fact, you have to keep, and as long as it's relevant for healthcare data is as long as the patient's alive. Probably.
Hey Matt, can I pause you for a second and ask a question? You said keeping that data starts to become a big cost. And some of our folks that may be more tech oriented and aren't thinking about costs related to the business might not understand how that's possible. And I think that's a really interesting point. So I'd love if you'd elaborate on that.
Yeah. So anyone who's been running email servers for decades, which is maybe some of the people on this this call, has seen that mailboxes have had limitations on and off over the years, both in terms of the size of an object or maybe the total amount that's allowed to be in a mailbox. These days, in an era of cheap storage and frankly small email, people don't think too hard about how much it costs to store email. But remember that email is it's a searchable system. It's indexed. It's not very storage efficient compared to a file server. It's a database, right? Mm-hmm. So it costs a lot of money to store mail in a mailbox, and companies oftentimes make decisions to say not allow people to keep mail for more than 30 days or 60 days, and they may do that for cost reasons or for other reasons. And as a user, you might think that's annoying because then you have to take anything that's important in the mail and put it someplace else if you want to keep it. But that's an example where, the cost of keeping mail forever may be too high. Amy, go ahead.
So thinking about the cost in a different way, right? You're thinking more about like the cost of I have to house a server and I got to have drive space and all that stuff, but there's a liability cost to the business as well. And that's something that we as IT people need to be aware of. Um, I think about particularly the construction industry, for example, right? For whatever reason, that industry is highly prone to lawsuits. And if you're retaining your data forever, then you're housing a lot of potential liabilities there that you may not want to have. And if you do have a policy that is written and enforced, then you're not responsible for data that is beyond that time frame, right? Some
Yeah.
some regulated industries will define that time frame, but many of them don't. It's up to you to make that decision of what it is, and getting businesses out of that idea that "Oh, I need all of my data forever," because they don't. If you look at the data access times, they don't use that old data, right? Um, so think about the liabilities as well as just the straight up IT costs that you're incurring by keeping data around.
Absolutely. You ask people in accounting how long should you keep data, and what they tell you, they look it up in the book. They're like, okay, in your state, you need to keep the data for exactly like this many years, and then they tell you destroy all data older than that. You're supposed to shred your documents, right?
Yeah.
And for exactly that reason, right? Like you don't, if it has no more business value, or the business value is less than the potential liability of having this old information out there, it should be
Mhm.
destroyed. And people, businesses are supposed to be rational entities, right? And so service providers need to be aware that their customers are supposed to be rational entities, and it doesn't make sense to hold information and risk having it out there if it doesn't provide business value.
I love that you
But
said supposed to be. I love and appreciate that you said supposed to be.
It's so
um,
accurate. The supposed to be was like the most accurate bit of the whole thing that's been said so far because, yeah, trying to get people to actually set and enforce a retention time is really hard.
I still have
yeah.
report cards from third grade, so you're telling me.
But business owners are usually pretty good at giving you a reasonable timeline, but you have to first stop their brain and get them to understand what you're actually asking them, and give them the space to think about it, and convince them why it's important. And once you take that time to have the data discussion, the retention times tend to flow. And sometimes it's a question of, oh, we don't know how long we need that, and I need to ask so and so, and that's great, because that means they're thinking about something that they've never thought about before, right? And that's
Yeah,
going to help you tune the security needs. And in the case of a service provider, it might help you sell that security upgrade when the customer realizes, oh, my retention needs don't meet the service delivery, right?
good point.
You
Um,
know, one of the things I had to do with my MSP staff was one day we just sat down and said, okay, is we sort of did a self audit on our data and made sure that um, all the data we thought we had was what we did have, right, and nothing more, and that it was secured, and that we weren't housing any client data, and that there was no path from us to client data. That was a tricky one. So there's, you can get into a lot of interesting, wide-ranging discussions when you're talking about securing data.
we had a comment here, and someone said, for privacy reasons, HIPAA, and I think they mean protected health information, PHI, shouldn't be stored forever in an email box. And while it is possible to run secure email, the general best practice in the industry is to never have PHI in an email box. And it's really difficult when you're running a healthcare organization. Um, it's somewhat admissible to do that type of thing if you're inside an organization and a doctor is emailing a nurse, right? Because you're inside a single secure mail system, and you can secure the borders of that single mailbox server. But it's best practice to, when you've got one company and there's another company, one organization, another organization, to never allow that flow unless someone has actually studied the mail security and put compensating controls in place in there. And it's even best practice if a patient mails you um, PHI to even reply back, please don't send this to me on this channel. You need to send this to me a different way. So I would love to think that at some point in the future, mail will be secure, and we won't have to have that problem anymore. And things are getting better. There's this thing called MTA STS, which is becoming a standard right now, and so maybe mail will be safer in the future, but it's not right now. Without getting lost too much further in retention, securely dispose of data. So that's like connected to retention, right? When you no longer need the data, you need to dispose of it, and that might just mean you've deleted it off the system. Great, you've deleted it off the system. How have you made sure that that's enforceable, or that's a policy, or that it's happening regularly, right? So is there a process that people go through to make sure they're deleting it on the right time? Is there like a script that's running, or is the database automatically purging data, or are we cycling media, right? So is media being destructed properly? Some of us may remember shredders or other ways of physically destroying hard
Did they
drives.
get rid of shredders? Have I aged so much that we've now physically gotten rid of
Ha-
shredders?
have you seen a hard drive shredder before?
Oh no, I thought you were talking about a
Oh
paper
yeah.
shredder. I was
No,
like,
no,
wow,
no.
we are really
You
moving.
you call a shred truck to your office, and they come and they take a video, right? And someone counts the serial numbers off and writes them on a spreadsheet, chain of custody. Oh, we've handed over this drive, and then they shred them on video, and then you just have little chips left over. And recently, when we went to solid state drives, they had to create all new shredders, because the chips weren't being broken up small enough for the solid state drives. So
Oh, so
there's
people were able to still pull data off of the
Oh
not
yeah, it's a major
interesting.
industry
Wow.
problem, and thus why, in the healthcare industry, people know this. You should encrypt the data, and that's the next control, because if you're encrypting data on these end user
Well done.
devices, you don't have to go and try to collect these things and stuff them in shred trucks, which is almost impossible when it's an end user device, because when the thing dies, they just want to throw it out. And so the thing there is to encrypt the data on the device. And it's not that the encryption can't get cracked, if someone knows the password, but the point is that if you've encrypted data on a device, the way drive or file encryption typically works is you have like a password key or some kind of key that's connected to an authentication layer, and then you have what's called a master key or a volume key, and then you have the encrypted data. And if you destroy the thing in the middle, the
Oh yeah.
master encryption key, even if you still have the password, you can no longer decrypt the data. And so on a hard drive, what you can do, is you can just destroy the master key, which is very small in the beginning of the drive, and then you know that even though that data is still on the drive, even if you have the password to unlock that device, you will not be able to gain access to that data. And those of us with Intel chipsets may know that, you can actually put in place, um, chipset level, like master key wiping on endpoint devices, where, like if a laptop's been lost, as soon as it's like connected to a network someplace, it will
Oh, it
phone
just
home. It'll say,
yeah.
"Oh, I'm supposed to wipe myself," and it'll wipe it. And that's even if, someone on the local machine has tried to subvert it, because it's down at the chip layer. Similar things on mobile devices, right? We've all got mobile device management as an option now in our organizations for Google devices or Apple devices. These are really easy. Whether your email is in Google or Microsoft, and it probably shouldn't be anywhere else, both of those systems allow you to, manage the end state encryption and wipe devices in both, Apple and Google phones.
And the
Um,
wiping of devices is super easy to do. But
yeah.
if you're working on a Windows 11 machine, the TPM chips are a requirement for certified Microsoft, compliant device. And this whole thing is, and they're shipping with BitLocker enabled, right? So they ship this way. So unless you've undone it, you should, the endpoint devices should already be encrypted. But I see people undoing it all the time because they're afraid they're going to lose their BitLocker key. But that BitLocker key is stored in your Active Directory. It gets stored in your Microsoft account. You can print it out. There's a lot of different ways that you can keep track of that thing.
You
But
could
the
write it on a
main,
post-it and stick it on your
write it in a post-it and stick it on your monitor, hide it under your keyboard, whatever your comfort
or just
level
make it an
is.
easy password that you won't forget.
I know it's
Sorry.
not an easy. It's a big one. But
Yeah, the
I mean
recovery keys are quite long.
yeah, but the main thing is that you can't take a drive out of a machine anymore and connect it to another machine and just start reading the data because it is tied to that physical hardware that it came from.
Yeah,
So we have a
it's
lot of good tools in place for managing this particular control.
this is David's note here. This is a good point. So people are, they are afraid because they don't properly track their recovery keys. That's true. And it's why, as a service provider, this is part of your job. Okay. The things come encrypted by default. iOS, Google devices, Windows machines, Chromebooks, Macs, they're all encrypted by default. But that's not enough, right? At the management layer, we need to make sure that there's policies set, and part of the policy is make sure it's turned on and can't be turned off. And the other part of the policy is do the job of making sure that there's a procedure to recover the keys, right? And that might be that the service provider has a process, or it might be some fancy hardware key server, right, or cloud key server, and that those are all options. Um, and also that I'm saying that all those devices are encrypted by default, but there is another consideration, which is that some distributors at the distribution level disable the encryption. Um, and I don't want to name specific vendors, but there's a number of vendors that happens. And you might think, oh, I'm using an Android phone and we're fine. But the distributor has disabled,
Tisk,
particularly
tisk,
those Chinese
tisk.
brands.
I don't
Yeah.
want to name
Bad
vendors.
practice.
Names vendor.
Yeah. Well, it's not
Well,
Google's fault, right? When someone that's using their open source decides to go in there and turn off a security feature, but that
right,
happens, right? And
they're perfectly
same thing in
allowed. They're
Microsoft
perfectly
world.
allowed. Yeah, they can do
Yeah.
it. Well, you know what I like even better is not keeping any data actually on endpoints.
Oh, I
In
I
in
love
in
that
in,
one. I
in I
love
mean,
that one.
in today's world, that there's no reason for that, right? We're all cloud connected, and what's here in the device is the applications, and the data is
So
kept elsewhere in secure spaces.
this stuff might sound really geeky. The list I just went through, 1 through 6, um, the Center for Internet Security says that this list, everything we just talked about, is mandatory for every single company in the world. Whether I used a car wash example earlier, whether you're a car wash, right, or you're in nuclear control, right? Every organization that has computers that they need to operate their business should have these things, and it's the job of the service provider to somehow ensure that these things are tuned for the end customer. And before
But
we go on,
Matt,
I just wanted to emphasize that.
I'm a small business owner. We only have a few employees and a few devices, so that doesn't matter, right?
Well, I mean, it might not matter if you don't have payment information and you never use credit cards and you don't need your computers for your job.
And it's not your livelihood.
Oh,
It doesn't matter because it's not your livelihood, right? That's what I always say. Like, you hear that a
Yeah.
lot. Like, "Oh, we're not Fort Knox or we're not General Motors." It's like, yeah, but you're still depending on this for your livelihood, right?
As
So
long
we
as you've
should
never
protect it.
used your computer for online banking or work, you're good.
I've done both of those. Okay, I gotta do some work here, I
You're
guess.
All right, so
in
let's go into
trouble.
the advanced ones, but I'll run through those quicker. A classification scheme. Um, uh, so what this means is that you've taken that list earlier and you've thought about how different data stored in different places might be different. A really obvious example, if anyone has ever worked a federal contract, is because the federal government's already defined what types of data there are, right? There's FCI, federal contract information, and then there's CUI, controlled unclassified information. Those are the most common classifications for data that federal contractors run into. And FCI is like the name of the contract and the contract terms. CUI is any data that the government sent you to fulfill that contract, which may have pretty sensitive stuff in it, right? So you have to protect those at different levels. In healthcare, we have PHI and not PHI, right? It either relates to a patient or it doesn't relate to a patient, right? Um, there's many other data classifications that are defined by regulators, but if you don't have a regulatory scheme defined by an outside party as a business, you should just decide, important, not important. Would be really bad if it was leaked to the world, doesn't matter, right? come up with some scheme, make it as simple as you want. That's 3.7. And I'm going to run through the second page pretty fast here. Document data flows. This can be as simple as a document, which shows where all those different classifications, different inventory data, how they're all connected together, either physically or logically across a network. This thing talks to that thing. This person can access this data. Document it, right? This doesn't need to be a picture. It can be written out. Either way is fine. Encrypt data on removable media. I like much better these days. Don't allow removable media because I think the business case for removable media is pretty indistinct. I think it would be very difficult these days with cloud for people to say, "Oh, we need removable media because." But if you do need removable media and it's an option for people to put data on that media, you should be encrypting that media the same way you'd encrypt a hard drive. Encrypt data in transit. I think everyone's familiar with this already. There's been a lot of work on that over the last 10 years. The web defaults to encrypted these days. It's very difficult to turn off, but we're also looking at every other type of encryption. Um, encrypt data at rest. These are for sensitive data, by the way. The CIS is not saying you need to encrypt things that have no sensitivity, but encrypt data at rest. We talked about that already, encrypting endpoints, but you can also encrypt servers. Segmenting data processing and storage based on sensitivity. So I think a lot of administrators do this by default because it's been a best practice for a long time. But the DMZs have been around forever, right? Since the 90s, and they've been standard since the 90s. Although they're going away in this world of zero trust, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Um, but what's important in 3.12 is that when you segment that data processing or network or storage, that you do it based on the sensitivity from the plan, not based on the administrator thinks, well, we usually segment this from that. It should be specifically related to the classification scheme, the sensitivity, the inventory of that business, right? And it shouldn't be the other way around. You shouldn't be taking a pre-cooked segmentation plan and figuring out how to stick the customer's data in it. Not unless you've already thought about this size customer in this industry with these things going on in their business, right? You should really be looking at their business needs and segmenting around that. And that's what
If
this control means.
we go back to 311 for a second, that encrypt data at rest, I think that's actually the most difficult control. It sounds so simple, but oftentimes we're not in control of that data, right?
What
Because
does at
it's
rest mean before we go too much
it,
further? And I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
no, it's okay. At rest means that it's sitting someplace on a server, right? It's nobody's accessing it. It's just it's where it lives when nobody's using it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
So
like, and if an attacker breaks in, right? Can they get at archives that no one's been looking at for years? Is like one of the things that attackers do when they come in is they go after the backups, right? Because sometimes the primary servers are protected, but those backups are stored at rest someplace else, and they're not protected in the same way. And an attacker, that's one of the first things they do is look for the backups because they're oftentimes not, they're overlooked, they're not protected.
that's where 3.8 comes in. That's probably where your main source of removable media is going to be the backup not being encrypted. But
Mhm.
311, when they first came out with these controls, and we went to implement them, we got to this part and said, well, but almost every accounting package that exists in the world is not encrypting their database. That is thankfully changed a little bit over the years, but there is still a lot of old applications in use in businesses that if you encrypt that data that application uses, it doesn't understand it. So this is an area where you may actually have to go forth and update applications in order to get the ability to encrypt the data at
You
rest
know,
and still be able to
there
use it.
there was a lot of work on encrypting databases over the last 10 years, but I think we never really reached a state where me as a security professional, I'm happy with the state of the industry there. I think, yes, it's possible to encrypt those databases, but it's very difficult to do it in a way that's safe and actually achieves the objective. And I think we're best practice in industry right now, and it's to create a security enclave around your database, right? And the best way to do that right now is in the cloud. So you shouldn't even be able to log into your database server at all. There's very few excuses why an end organization needs to be managing their own databases when we have Microsoft and Google and MongoDB and Snowflake and others maintaining high quality database servers that pass the highest protection standards offered by the federal government under their FedRAMP program. The fact that you can have these databases in a secure facility, that security enclave with encrypted disks, right, is probably the safest way to store that data, not trying to encrypt a database file.
Yeah.
But then
I
you need
thought
a
it was
constrained interface around the database server, right? And
yeah.
really make sure that the right people have access to the right data and only under the right conditions.
I thought it was pretty brilliant when Microsoft moved their at SQL Online, right? And it's like totally abstracted the server. Like
That's right.
so people don't have access to the server anymore. They can stick their database over there, but somebody who does database security for a living and that's all they do manages that as part of the service that you buy.
It's not just somebody, right? It's
Yeah,
several whole teams,
it's
right?
not just one guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Several whole teams,
Yep.
all looking at different aspects of farms of database servers, right?
Yep.
Um, so so that's it for IG2. These are so IG2 is recommended for these are your mid-market companies. These are companies that probably have their own custom software, their own custom IT needs. They probably aren't running just off-the-shelf Office 365. They may have application servers. You've probably been doing project work with them at some time if you're a solution provider. They may have their own IT staff, but they're not regulated. They're not. They're not in situations where the government's going to say, "Hey, you need extra security because you're critical," or we're regulating your industry. And most importantly, an IG2 company will never be in a situation where failure of their security can impact human safety. If any of those things are true, you're an IG3 company. And what the Center for Internet Security says is you need a DLP system, a data loss prevention system. Data loss prevention is for confidentiality. It's a little bit confusing because a lot of people hear the word data loss and they think, oh, I've literally lost that data. What it means is you've lost control of the data. So a data loss prevention is a system that's specifically built to ensure that data doesn't leave the place it's supposed to be. And an example of that might be a watermark on a document, right? An example of that is, Hollywood's been sending out screeners for decades, and for movies before they're released, and they have like these barcodes across the top or that flash on interstitial frames, and so that if they leak out, they can see exactly who leaked the document, who leaked that movie. And so a DLP system will do something like that. It may also do things like lock down those USB ports and all sorts of other things. Sensitive data access, and this is the last one. Look, you don't need to buy anything for this. This is literally a switch you can flip on your file server. It is literally a switch you can flip on almost any object storage system. However, it will create an immense amount of logs, so you do need to shift them someplace. But the idea here is that anytime anyone looks at data, that you've logged that. And this is particularly important if you have a database system, and it's particularly difficult if you have a database system, because it's not enough to just log application A accessed data B. You have to really tie down which user accessed which row of data, and that can get onerous. And so you need to build that into an application when you're engineering it. Data protection. We really went deep there because this was 14 subcontrols. Amy, anything you want to add before we leave data access control land?
No, I mean, that last one is almost impossible to implement it in my experience. Like you said, it just generates so much data. And then what are you going to do with it and who's going to look at it? I mean, it's
It's a problem for
ugly.
another control.
Yeah. I'm happy to give that one off to somebody else.
Yeah, I look, managing your own logs is nearly impossible for most organizations. You have to hire someone to do that. You have to hire someone to
Yeah.
be the librarian and to watch for anomalies. That's important. So hopefully we took almost half an hour on that. Well, it's probably enough. We covered a lot of the why. Why do we care about zero trust, right? And in the reason why is we want to control who has access to when, what type, who has access to what, and when they can access it and how they can access it, right? And that's why we care about zero trust. Um, and zero trust is a catch-all word, right? 20 years ago, we engineered the security perimeter, right? And then for a while we talked about defense in depth, which was this idea of also having security beyond the perimeter. And the current mode of security, or the current philosophy of security, is that there is no perimeter. You should be checking for authorization every way you can, wherever you can. And that's the general philosophy of zero trust. How to do that in reality is much more difficult. And Amy, you're here to talk to us about how Azure AD and Microsoft Intune can accomplish many of these goals of context-based access management, which is the geeky way we talk about zero trust, right?
Yeah, Microsoft calls it conditional access for the most
Yep.
part. There's a lot of
Yep.
different components and things besides, but conditional access is the main one. But first, everybody needs to realize that the word zero trust, that's like a marketing term. And so, if you go to a conference and yeah, everybody's got their yellow washed zero trust moment, and what they're offering may not necessarily be zero trust, right? But it's a good selling point. So it brings you to the booth, and that's what they want. But make sure you know what they're actually offering. So as there's so many pieces to it, right? So the piece that we're going to talk about is conditional access, and conditional access in Azure Active Directory, which is now called Entra ID. I think the marketing team is running amok over at Microsoft, but that's my personal opinion. um, in conditional access, we get to say who gets to access data from what types of devices, from which applications, at what location, what ISP, what risk level is their user operating at the moment? Are they meeting their criteria of their usual activities, right? So Azure AD will build kind of a profile of the user and say, you know, usually they log in between, 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., but now they're logging in at 4 a.m. That doesn't seem right. So before I give them access to this data, I'm going to send them a second MFA prompt and make sure if they give me more confidence that I think that they are who they say they are,
So
right?
that's step up authentication, if anyone's heard of that before. That's like
Okay.
we're already authenticated, but hey, something's happening here that we think we might want to get a little more verification, right? So we're going to step up and do like another layer of authentication, ask for their password again, do an MFA. The way this would happen in the real world is we'd pick up the phone and call someone and say like, "Hey, is this you?" Which is a thing we may
Hey,
all
I
want to
think your
consider.
Facebook got hacked. Are you are you trying to send me more cows on Farmville?
So that's time based. What other types of conditions do you see?
um, we use the condition of is the device that you're trying to access this data from known to us, right? So is your device part of our uh, part of our system? Is it under management? If it is, then we have more trust in that device, or we're not going to allow any devices that aren't part of our Active Directory
So
to access that data.
if it's not joined into Azure AD, maybe allow it to do some things, but not allow it to access this sensitive application, or maybe not allow it to do anything, right?
Right. Yeah, most often we just don't allow it to do anything, right? It's easier easier to manage that way. But yes, you can narrow it down and say, oh, if you're accessing this type of data, and you can also do that with that step up authentication you talked about. Microsoft introduced something called authentication strengths. So you could say, oh, your normal default is a text message, right? And you punch in the code. But if you need to access this data, we're going to step up that strength and make you use a authentication application, right? So where we can actually capture your location data as well as that code, or maybe a face ID or something like that, so that we can actually set different levels of that MFA now based on the type of data.
What about the thing I always, this is like an interview question I ask people. Are we validating that the endpoint is encrypted? Are we validating that they are screen locks? Are we validating that the OS is patched? Are we validating that it's a supported browser? Because these are
Mhm.
like they're elsewhere in CIS. All these questions, right? So is this something that we can use a combination of the Azure AD product suite and Intune to enforce?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Intune, there's a concept of something called compliance. And compliance doesn't mean like compliance to the SEC rules or the HIPAA rules. What it means is like the minimum standard that we're going to set for a device, right? And we're going to say, oh, that device has to be either Windows 10 or Windows 11, right? If we have 10 in our environment, if we just have 11s, we'll say, oh, you have to be an 11, right? And because the bad guys all use really old OSs. I don't know what it is, if they're still in their supposedly they're not hacking from their mom's basement anymore, but they are hacking from pretty crummy machines usually. And so we see a lot of stuff coming in via Windows 7 yet. And it was like, we don't have any Windows 7 machines. So Windows 7 machines are just not allowed, just period. If you're on a Windows 7 machine, zero access for you, you know?
You can keep attackers out that way, but you could also make
Yeah.
sure that your users' endpoints are secure, right? That they're not going to be taken advantage of by attackers because their machines are configured to a secure state. I believe you can usually set policies like, oh, make sure they've got all their patches from last week. Make sure that
Mhm.
their browser is at least this version, like from 2 weeks ago, right? Make sure their browser is no more than 2 weeks old. You can do things like that.
Yep. Yeah, we can do dated browser. We can require specific browsers, right? So if we only want to support Chrome and Edge, we can say it's got to be a Chrome and Edge. Sorry, you can't get there from Safari. Um, we can, there's a lot of things. So, but basically, we're going to set that minimum standard, right? You got to have your firewall enabled on your device, right? Or if we're using a particular security tool, right, that has to be there and it's got to be enabled and running, right? So it'll
yeah,
go through and check these things. And then we say, okay, you've met these minimum criteria. Now let's make sure you are you, right? And then that's where the multi-factor authentication kicks in. And once you pass that, now your device has been cleared and you've been cleared. Now you've got access to data.
yeah, and we could even drill down into your mobile devices as well. We can make sure that, for example, the mobile device is enrolled, right? Make sure that the mobile device is actually managed by the company. If there's data that's going to be synchronized onto it, making sure that we have the ability to wipe that out again, making sure the device is not rooted. And
Mhm.
and the web browser is a really important surface as well. And so making sure that that browser is managed, that it's that it, and this is something that's, it's technically complex. It's a little acrobatic for most engineering organizations, but it's not expensive to set the browser up to be enrolled, right, in policy management, so that,
Mhm.
for example, we don't have creepy extensions installed into Chrome or Edge, right? That could be harvesting all your network traffic, right? We see them on TV, like those discount code ones, like Honey, you know, and they like beam all of your internet traffic back someplace else, right? To like find you deals,
Find
right?
you a deal.
And
Yeah. That's all they're doing. That's all they're doing with it.
well,
I'm
they're
sure.
monetizing it clearly, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
they don't
I will
claim.
say though, having a managed browser, and I have one on my mobile device, is the most onerous security that I have to put up with. All the other steps. So, we're always walking this line between functional and secure. And having a managed browser is kind of a pain in the neck because on our mobile devices, there's this mix of work and personal that happens on them. Right. So, and one of the things you get with the managed browser is that there's a restriction between being able to copy stuff out of your browser and put it into
Hmm.
another application that the organization doesn't manage. Right. So, I see something in my browser and I want to text it to somebody. It's like, nope, sorry, your data can't be pasted over here. So, it's actually one of the cool things we have in security now that we can determine what applications our data is allowed to be used in. But it's also a pain in the neck thing if you have a device that is both personal and
Yeah.
business
Well, that
related.
it's a challenge, but engineering organizations can manage that. They can say, "Hey, you're going to use this Chrome browser on your mobile device, and we're going to manage that. But you can use Safari for whatever you want, right? Or on your
Right.
local machine, and this is both in Edge and Chrome. This is possible. You can force when you're connecting to company applications, company websites, company software, company
Mhm.
SaaS, right? Going through the Azure AD, you can force it so that you're logged into a company profile in the browser that maybe has all those extensions disabled. But maybe you actually do want to use Honey when you're shopping on the web for your
Trying to get those
latest
deals.
discounts on TVs, right? Well, I got the background, right? It's all Honey.
Yeah. They got a free ad here today, man.
Well, I also called them out for crappy security, so
That's
but
true. It was
a-
even.
in any case, like you can have that separate profile, right? And the company stuff can be over here, and the private stuff can be over here, and Android devices have that idea of work profile, right? It
They
works a
do,
little bit different
yeah.
than iOS, but
Yeah, Android has your personal profile, your work profile, and if you stick an app over on the work side, you get to manage what it does, and then the personal stuff stays separate.
right.
It's a great way to delegate. The iOS works completely different than that. It's just all
Yep.
commingled. But what we can say for, you know, on our zero trust stuff here is to say that, oh, when you open an application that comes from a business source, say your OneDrive for business, it must open in Word that we manage, right? And so it just
Right, with
keeps that
macros turned off.
keep that box. Yeah. I don't think you got macros on your mobile device, but yeah, you get really pretty amazing controls. And there's a new thing too, right? Because man in the middle attacks are a thing. And they seem to be raising their ugly heads again, where people get fooled into entering their credentials into PayPal, like they think they're going to their PayPal, but it's a fake PayPal. And they authenticate using their MFA, and then the bad guys grab the token and they go off and use it to
Yeah,
empty out your PayPal
Microsoft
account.
Oh no.
Microsoft got in trouble in the news last week for that. It wasn't their fault because this is not something they can do anything about. But yeah, there's some APTs out there that they've got that game all worked out, right?
Yeah,
And and
they
they
do. So one of the ways we can mitigate that with our conditional access is they came out with something called continuous continuous access. So what it does, it is continually evaluating whether it thinks you are still you or not. Right. So
Oh,
if you were
interesting.
working along and you were in, Royal Oak, Michigan, where I live, and then, 15 minutes later, all of a sudden it says that you are now looking at that same file from, Ohio. It's like, you couldn't have gotten here from there that quickly. Why
well,
did
and
you
you
why did you switch to another place all of a sudden? And so you'll see that MFA prompt come up, or it'll just kill your access. Right. So it's that continually checking that token to see if they think it's still valid. So they're no longer just issuing it and then, oh, you have it until you log off.
yeah,
So yeah, you
and
have it
there's
until something about you changes.
That's important. The other thing is to consider that, yeah, we all know we're supposed to be doing MFA, and we should probably be doing it anytime we ask for a password, and many times we don't ask for a password. We should be looking at multi-factor authentication. And what maybe some people listening don't realize is that, this is an arms race, and we're in a post-password world right now, and there's people talking about passwordless, and I don't necessarily prescribe to the idea that businesses should be moving post password yet. I don't think the technology's there yet. But it is true that the multi factor authentication code probably provides more security than the password these days. But it's not enough. And attackers are getting by these. They're getting by push off, they're getting by the code off. And in a few years, if your organization doesn't have hardware keys, you're really not going to be able to keep the client safe, right? And today's hardware keys, they can go into USB-C ports, they can go into USB-A ports, the big square ones. They can go into Lightning ports. They can be connected by Bluetooth. They can be connected over NFC into your mobile device, whether it's an Android or an iPhone. And in some cases, they're integrated. Like I've got one integrated into my laptop, a hardware key that actually, to utilize that authentication source, a physical meat finger, right, has to push a physical button, right? That's the point of the hardware keys, because the key is stored inside something that can't be stolen, right? It's not even possible for that to be stolen by an attacker and borrowed for an attack man in the middle style. And I think if you're doing new customer deploys today, particularly if you're in the mid market, you should be starting with hardware keys. And if you're thinking about going there soon, YubiKey is a great vendor. There's a Chinese firm called Fightin, which, despite some people having a little creepy feeling about China, is actually a reputable firm. That's what Google uses for their Titan security program. Um, I think that everyone that's watching should be, if you haven't researched these hardware keys, you should be looking into them, because tying down the context-based access to something that can't be stolen over the internet, or borrowed from a user's screen, or that the user can't be tricked into, is really, really super important. And
Yeah, I with you. I think that they should start using it themselves because it is a different experience, right? I still run into IT people that are like, yeah, my users, they're just not going to get that whole MFA thing. Let's just do the text code. I don't want to have to deal with the app. And I'm like, give them a little credit. People can do the app. It's not that big of a deal, right?
Matt and I were having a conversation earlier today about they're not gonna get is really shorthand for I'm not competent in teaching.
Ooh.
So if anybody feels like their client isn't able to get something,
Yeah. No, I I
that's
f-
not
I
true.
f- I feel it's an excuse, but using a key is a different thing. I have a UB key, which, by the way, UB folks, I need a new one because my my new laptop doesn't have the proper USB port anymore. Um, and it is a different experience for logging in, right? I mean, that thing takes my fingerprint, right? I put it on, it takes the fingerprint, it does the whole authentication. I can't get into my Google account without it. So, there's a bunch of things that it gets tied to, both personal and work. And it's super secure and it's a great solution. But if you haven't been using it for yourself for a while, you're not going to be able to talk to users intelligently about it and explain it to them and its importance and, all that
now,
stuff.
I just want to point out these two vendors real quick, and I always recommend Yubico because they have a FIPS validated key, which means the federal government has um, oversight on the manufacturing process. It's been certified to be secure. There was an instance a few years ago where some attackers gained access to the secret keys at RSA, which at the time was the top tier
Right.
vendor for hardware keys. And so it is important to control the manufacturing of these keys and how they are created. But Yubico is the what I would send most MSPs to. but an alternative vendor that may be a few dollars cheaper, but really only a few dollars cheaper, is that Chinese company, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Fitian, Fightin. I'm not sure, but that's, I believe, the vendor that
Fascia.
Google
Looks
uses.
like
Yeah.
Fidian. How it do they have a FIPS, and how would that work being in China?
Oh no, they
They
don't
don't have
have
a
a
FIPS
FIPS,
control.
but
Yeah.
it's not based on where in the world that they are manufactured. It's really, is there oversight in the manufacturing process that's important. And there are other vendors. Certainly, the defense communities familiar with the PIV and CAC cards. The CAC cards are just PIV cards that have your a picture on them. Um, but the Yubico can be used as a PIV card. And with those things are really neat, by the way. When the user walks away from the PC, they have to pull it with them because it's like attached to a lanyard or something, and the desktop will just lock down. But I think I've talked to a lot of MSPs about this, and one of the things that they ask, having never done it sort of in field trials before, they may own one, but they may be worried about doing it with 100 users or 1,000 users, is they say, well, my users like get new phones all the time and they always need these MFA resets, and it's going to get really expensive. How am I going to mail these keys? Having been through some hardware key projects, I would like to just offer some knowledge here. Firstly, these keys are extremely difficult to destroy. They can go through I've personally put my own hardware encryption keys that we require at our company through the wash like over and over and over again, and they come out fine. So there's that. Um, Secondly, they're almost indestructible from physical damage because they're small and they're difficult to break. And thirdly, people don't lose them the way they lose almost anything else. You would be surprised, because either you have the small ones that fit into a laptop, or people attach them to their wallets or keychains. People tend not to lose these things. They lose their cell phones more frequently. Um, so people tend not to lose them. They're almost indestructible, and they do cost money. They certainly cost more than a mobile app. But you can retail them for somewhere between $5 and $30, depending on where in the feature and quality scale you want to search. And I'm happy recommending models that are at the $20 line in almost any scenario. But you can go cheaper than that, and you should. It will actually cut down your support load, because people aren't going to be struggling with the app and how to do the QR code, and you can use one key, one physical key for dozens or hundreds of online apps, right? So
Yeah. You know what? You reminded me of something that is built into Windows that almost nobody knows. In that, in it, like I'm sitting here with my cell phone, right? And my laptop, and everybody with a laptop pretty much has their cell phone sitting close to it because they're working like me here, there, and everywhere. Um, if I step away from if I step away from my laptop and I forget to lock it, when my cell phone leaves, it will the computer knows that it's lost signal to the cell phone, it locks. That's a
Interesting.
feature that's built into Windows. And you don't need anything, no special hardware, no nothing. It does it through Bluetooth. So and then I actually it'll so you have to get like 30 feet away sort of by default before it says, oh, the Bluetooth signal has diminished to a certain point. The phone must be gone, and it locks. So it's great for people that tend to just get up and forget to lock their computer.
The
Um,
Wanderers.
yeah, the one, right? Like we all sort of, make hobbies out of locking people's computers, or doing stupid things with them at conferences when they just get up and walk off
I
and
had some
leave
friends
their,
in college that taught me
yeah,
well not to leave
how
things.
to how to how to how to deploy the upside down screensaver thing just to freak
They
them
were
out. Like,
deploying all sorts of things.
So we've
yeah,
eaten our hour here. I, I, the data controls just took a long time, but
Good
clearly,
stuff though.
um, this is a this is a geeky topic, right? Particularly, access control. But you guys have any takeaways? Zach, do you have any final questions?
Oh man, you don't want to ask me if I have any final questions. I could ask questions all day. I think that we covered a lot of really good stuff though, and I mean, no, not on this side.
We have a lot of people asking about how to find these hardware keys. So I think we should leave links in the show notes. I'm gonna link the we'll add it to YouTube and to LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But
Well, and while you're doing that for the viewers, we can give Amy a moment to talk about, what she does and a little bit more about,
sure, we can do
you know,
final plugs. Let's do it.
her angle in the space. Go ahead.
All right. So, well, you did give them the names of those two companies, as we talked about them here. So yeah, just go Google them and use them. Give them a try. It's a it's an experience, and if you haven't used it yourself, you're you, you need to before you actually do a deployment. So what do I do? I've got a lot of stuff over at ThirdTier. So I'd like you guys to follow me over at thirdtier.net. I run a few Facebook groups off of that as well. So if you're a Facebook person, we've got a ransomware and security group. There's an Intune and group over there where we talk a lot about conditional access and Intune policies and endpoint management stuff. And then I am also something we didn't mention, and I'll just plug it here. I'm the president of the National Society of IT Service Providers. We're a new organization, but our goal is to raise the level of professionalism in our industry. And our industry encompasses developers, security pros, IT people, right? We're all part of the same industry. And we all know those people out there that aren't operating in a very professional manner. And so we would like to just elevate the whole industry, and also do things to represent ourselves when new legislation is being talked about. So we just opened up a line of communication with CISA, and we've got some opportunities to serve on various committees with CISA that they've invited us to fill. So we're doing some really good stuff over there, and I'd like you all to check that out. I'll send a link so you can put that in the show notes. But National
Please.
Society of IT Service Providers, I know it just rolls off the tongue, right?
Well, and I'll say this just to tag on. When we first got connected and spoke, the reason that I was so excited to have you on was that perspective that we both share, or that we all three share, or that I guess your orgs in Fort Mesa share, that we need to be raising the level of our industry in a number of different ways, whether it be from professionalism or from an ethical nature or just from a knowledge perspective. We got
Mhm.
to do better, and that's what made me most excited for you to join. Your knowledge, is wonderful as well, but that's the number one piece for me. So glad to have you.
Thanks, Amy. And just I'll do the really quick one. Of course, Fort Mesa, we make SaaS for MSPs to own their clients' cybersecurity roadmap. We work in the GRC place that's governance, risk, and compliance spaces. We also work in vulnerability management. So a bunch of interventions that we think MSPs should be adopting to both make more money on cybersecurity, while also keeping their customers safer. So with that, I think we're gonna roll out of here, Amy, and we'll make sure to get those links out onto the web.
Thanks for
Awesome.
joining us today. And everybody, thanks for joining us as well. And have a great weekend.